The Death Star hung in the void above the Imperial Center like a second metal moon, and Grand Moff Wilhuth Tarkin stood at the viewport of its overbridge with the calm of a man about to commit the largest mass murder in galactic history. Below him, far below, the lights of Coruscant burned in their familiar billion-windowed patterns. Spires of glass and durasteel climbed from the planet's choked depths. Sky lanes pulsed with traffic, and somewhere beneath all of it, in the rotting undercities the Empire pretended not to see, a fire was building. For months, Imperial Security Bureau dispatches had grown more frantic. Sabotage in the Senate District, coordinated bombings in the works. ISB cells turned up empty. Their officers vanished into the lower levels. The lawlessness was no longer a nuisance. It was a movement. In his throne room atop the old Republic Executive Building, Emperor Sheev Palpatine could feel it. Not through reports or holograms, but through the Force itself. The dark side had warned him for weeks of something coiled beneath his feet. A vast, building hatred from his own capital, his own elites, his own Senate. Even Grand Vizier Masameda kneeling before him sounded afraid. "Master, panic spreads through the bureaucracy. Officers desert. Senators conspire openly." Palpatine smiled. Tarkin had proposed the answer in a private holocall the previous night. Destroy Coruscant. The very thought had once been heresy, even to Tarkin. But the Tarkin doctrine itself demanded an absolute demonstration. And the Emperor, who had spent a lifetime listening to the dark side, had heard it whispered that the time for half measures was finished. Lord Vader objected. He stood now in the throne room, helmet dipped, voice mechanical and low.
"Master, Coruscant is the heart of the Empire. Without it, the core fractures."
"The Empire,"
Palpatine rasped,
"is me, Lord Vader. Not a planet, not a senate, not a throne. Me. And the galaxy will be reminded of that truth."
Vader said nothing further. Outside, the Death Star moved into position. In the days that followed, those who knew began to flee. Imperial officers received quiet transfers to Outer Rim postings. The wealthiest families of level 5127 and above chartered private cruisers under absurd pretexts. Mid-Rim ambassadors developed sudden, fortunate illnesses. Junior ISB analysts who saw too much of the fleet's deployment patterns simply disappeared. Princess Leia Organa noticed the pattern from her diplomatic suite in the Senate District. Whole battle groups of Star Destroyers had repositioned along Coruscant's outer defense grid. The official explanation, anti-terror exercises, convinced no one with eyes. Bail Organa's voice came across a coded transmission from his ship, soft and urgent. "Leia, something is coming. Get to the Tantive 4, now!" Mon Mothma vanished entirely, going to ground in a safe house her staff did not know existed. But for the trillions who lived on Coruscant, no one came. Speeders moved through the skylines. Cantinas filled. Children went to school in the upper levels and slept in stacked tenements in the lower. Beneath it all, in the buried catacombs where the Jedi Temple's foundation stones lay among ancient Sith shrines, the air seemed to grow thick and watchful. Darth Vader walked those ruins alone, one final time. He passed broken statues of Jedi he had known. He felt the dark side gathering around the planet like a storm front. And for the briefest moment, beneath the helmet, the man who had once been Anakin Skywalker felt something that was not quite triumph and not quite grief. He turned and walked back to his shuttle without looking at the temple again. Enjoying our alternative Star Wars universe? Consider liking and hitting the hype button to show us your support. Don't forget to subscribe for more mind-bending tales from the Star Wars universe. The Death Star fired without warning. There was no ultimatum, no demand for surrender, just a holographic broadcast transmitted seconds before the strike, in which the Emperor's grave, papery voice informed the galaxy that a separatist remnant bioweapon had been detected on Coruscant. Quarantine, he said, had failed. Then, the Superlaser woke. 8 tributary beams converged into a single emerald spear. It struck Coruscant near the equator, punched through the planetary shield grid as if it were tissue, and detonated the core in a single perfect instant. The world that had been the capital of galactic civilization for over 25,000 years simply ceased to exist. A trillion lives ended in less than a heartbeat. Imperial moths, senators, clerks, bureaucrats, smugglers, Pike operatives, the last hidden Jedi survivors who had taken shelter in the Undercity. Mas Amedda himself, left behind by an emperor who had no further use for him. All of them gone, reduced to expanding clouds of dust and atmosphere, drifting silently in the orbital lanes. In a hovel on Tatooine, Luke Skywalker fell to his knees, clutching his head. Across the Junlin wastes, Obi-Wan Kenobi staggered against a stone wall and wept openly for the first time in nearly 2 decades. On Dagobah, ancient Master Yoda stopped breathing for 9 full seconds, eyes wide and unseeing, as the Force itself screamed and would not stop. Even Palpatine, watching from the Death Star's observation platform, swayed slightly on his feet. The death cry he had engineered was vaster than he had anticipated. He smiled anyway. The Empire had expected obedience. It got something else. Within hours of the strike, the holonet collapsed under a flood of contradictory reports. Within a day, Imperial governors across the core began acting on their own initiatives. Without Coruscant, the Imperial bureaucracy had no spine. Tax codes went unenforced. Hyperlane traffic control fragmented into regional patchworks. The intergalactic banking clan's central ledgers, archived in the old Republic vaults, were simply gone. Kuat Drive Yards declared a production pause. Corellia shipyards followed within hours. The Hosnian system raised its system defense fleet without Imperial authorization. Across the Midrim, garrison commanders began openly questioning the chain of command, because there was no longer a chain of command. There was only Palpatine, somewhere on a fortress world no one could name, and the Imperial bureaucracy had always been a machine of intermediaries. Without its central node, every regional governor was suddenly an emperor of his own sector, and every sector was suddenly a potential successor state. Unlawful, an Imperial recruitment office burned for 3 days while local stormtroopers stood in the street and did not intervene. On Naboo, the Queen's Regional Council formally suspended Imperial taxation. On Ariadu, Tarkin's own homeworld, his cousin Ranulf publicly disowned the Tarkin name and declared independence, an act of cold political genius that would, in time, save half the family from prosecution. Admiral Conan Antonio Motti, aboard the Death Star, called for immediate martial law across every major industrial world. Tarkin overruled him. Director Orson Krennic, whose engineers had built the weapon, attempted to assert direct authority over the station and was rebuffed at gunpoint by Tarkin's personal guard. Leia, aboard the Tantive 4, made the decision that would define her life. She seized the Corvette's broadcast array, overrode her father's encryption protocols, and transmitted her testimony on a galaxy-wide rebel frequency. This was not a separatist bioweapon. This was the Empire. The Empire destroyed its own capital. They will destroy yours next. Rise. Whole sectors rose within the week. Worlds that had spent 20 years swallowing Imperial cruelty for the sake of stability now understood that stability had been a lie. Palpatine had built his throne on a planet, and he had burned the planet down to prove no throne was needed at all. In the desert, an old man finally told a boy the truth. Obi-Wan Kenobi sat across from Luke in a candlelit hovel while the Junlin wind hissed against the windows, and he did not soften any of it. He told Luke about the Jedi Order, about Anakin, about the Sith, about a galaxy whose central world had just been murdered by the man who claimed to rule it. Coruscant, Obi-Wan said quietly, was the light of the Republic, Luke. For all its corruption, for all its sins, it was the proof that civilization could endure. Palpatine has now proven civilization cannot endure under him. Do you understand what that means? Luke understood. He understood it again when they reached Mos Eisley and found the cantinas thick with refugees from destroyed industrial colonies on the old Coruscant supply routes. Worlds like Acellus and Brental that had starved within days of the capital's loss. Their hyperlane traffic had been routed through the core for so long that without Coruscant's central exchange, Freighters arrived empty or did not arrive at all. He saw a Twee-like mother feeding her children dried bantha jerky bought with the last of her grandfather's Republic-era credits, because the new Imperial script was no longer accepted anywhere outside the Imperial garrisons. He saw an old Coruscanti senator's aide, a man who had once briefed Bail Organa, now drinking alone in a corner booth with the unfocused eyes of a being who could not remember why he was still alive. He understood it on the Millennium Falcon when Han Solo, the same cynical smuggler who would have charged extra for politics a week later, refused to take Imperial credits at all. Chewbacca had refused first. The Wookiee remembered Kashyyyk. By the time Luke saw the stars stretch into the blue tunnel of hyperspace, he was no longer a farm boy dreaming of adventure. He was a young man who had felt 1,000,000,000,000 deaths through a power he barely understood, and he had decided, quietly, completely, that the Empire would not be reformed. It would be ended. Vader hunted her himself. He took the Devastator into the Outer Rim and tore through Rebel cells with a precision that frightened even his own officers. He did not delegate the search. The thought of her, this Alderaanian princess who had openly named the Emperor a murderer to a galaxy of trillions, had taken hold of him in a way he could not explain and would not examine. When at last he boarded a captured Corvette and walked the corridor toward Leia's holding cell, he felt the Force move strangely around her. There was a familiarity to her presence, a defiance that was not learned but inherited. She looked up at him from the deck where stormtroopers had thrown her, and she did not flinch. "You're trembling," she said. "Why?" Vader did not answer. He returned to his meditation chamber that night, and for the first time in years, removed his glove. The scarred ruin of Anakin Skywalker's hand looked back at him. Padme's face surfaced in his mind. He could not push it away. The girl had her chin. She had Padme's chin. Across the Devastator, in a cell deep in the brig, Leia closed her eyes and felt something brush against her consciousness. Vast, broken, and ashamed. She did not understand what it was, but for the first time, she suspected the man in the mask was not entirely a man at all. Mon Mothma rose from her hidden moon and called the worlds together. She did it from the surface of Dantooine, in the ruins of an old Jedi enclave whose stones still hummed faintly with the Force, broadcasting on a stolen Imperial frequency. Within days, representatives from 100 systems came to her, some by Bail Organa's old contacts, some by Leia's broadcast, some simply because they had nowhere else to go. Admiral Giel Akbar of Mon Cala arrived with the battle fleet his species had hidden in the deep ocean trenches for nearly a decade. The great MC-80 cruisers still bearing the scars of their slave yard origins. Captain Antilles arrived with a wing of liberated Y-Wings. Cham Sandala sent fighters from Rylith. Hera Syndulla, his daughter, brought a phoenix-painted cell of veterans who had once been called Spectres. From the Outer Rim came smugglers' captains who had spent 20 years pretending the Empire did not exist and now understood that pretending was over. Saw Gerrera's partisans, what remained of them after years of brutal independent war, joined for the first time without preconditions. Coruscant had ended the era of disagreement. Mon Mothma stood before them all in a robe gray with morning ash and spoke without prepared text. "We are not here to win a war," she said. "We are here to rebuild a galaxy. The Empire has taken our center. We must become it. Every world here is now the capital. Every citizen here is now the Senate. We will not allow fear to inherit what civilization has built." The Rebel Alliance, as it would be called from that day forward, had its first true army. Palpatine retreated. He moved his physical presence to an unfinished fortress in the deep core, a world hidden behind hyperlink currents only Sith records remembered. From there, he issued a decree. There would be no more Senate, no more Moffs, no more sector governors. The galaxy would be reorganized into a Sith Imperium under his direct will, administered by Inquisitors and dark side acolytes whose loyalty he could measure through the Force. He told Vader none of it directly. Vader heard about it from Tarkin. The Emperor began quietly cultivating replacements, new apprentices gathered from inquisitorial ranks and from secret cloning projects whose existence Vader had only suspected. The dark side around Palpatine had grown jagged and hungry since Coruscant. He no longer trusted the apprentice who had once been Anakin Skywalker. He had felt Vader's hesitation in the moment the Superlaser fired, and he had not forgotten it. Vader, for his part, walked the corridors of the Executor in long silence. He thought of Padme. He thought of Leia. He thought of the temple ruins he had visited on Coruscant, and the way the Force had felt heavy with grief there. And he began very quietly to wonder what it could mean to outlive his master. When the Rebel fleet found the Death Star above Yavin, every pilot and every cockpit understood the stakes. This was not a strike against a future atrocity. This was a strike against the weapon that had already murdered a world. The pilots of Red and Gold Squadron flew with the names of dead Coruscanti relatives stenciled on their hulls. Some had been Senate guards. Some had been janitors in the Imperial Archives. Luke Skywalker, 20 years old and trembling with a destiny he did not yet name, heard Obi-Wan's voice through the Force and switched off his targeting computer. The proton torpedoes left his X-Wing in 2 clean pulses and rolled the exhaust shaft down to the reactor core. The Death Star died in a sphere of white fire above the jungle moon. Grand Moff Tarkin died with it, his last expression one of cold, almost philosophical disappointment. A man who had believed in fear as a system of governance, learning in his final second that the system had a final term he had not calculated. Admiral Modi died at his post. The engineers who had built the Superlaser died in the same instant they had once promised would deliver the galaxy. Vader's tie advanced, spun out into the void, scorched but intact. As he stabilized his fighter and watched the Death Star burn behind him, something inside the helmet broke that he could not name. For the first time since Mustafar, he felt his master's gaze across the galaxy, and he did not turn toward it. He did not return to the Emperor. He flew instead into the dark and was lost for a time. The galaxy did not end. It transformed. Without Coruscant, without a single seat of power, every world that survived had to learn to govern itself. The Rebel Alliance became something stranger than the Republic it had set out to restore. A confederation of morning worlds bound by the shared memory of a sky that had once held a planet and now did not. Luke Skywalker became a Jedi the slow way, by walking the ruins of temples no one else remembered and listening for voices in the Force. On Dagobah, an ancient Green Master would eventually receive him, much older than he had been the last time Yoda thought a Skywalker would come, and the lessons would take years. Leia accepted the burden of leadership beyond politics. She became, for many trillions of beings, the face of the galaxy's grief and the voice of its refusal to surrender. Vader did not return. Not yet. He drifted at the edge of known space, hunting whispers of his master's new apprentices, killing them one by one. He told himself this was strategy. In time, he would have to admit it was something else. And out where the Corellian run met the Perlemian trade route, surrounded by the silent drifting ruins of a planet city that had once been the heart of everything, refugee convoys passed through every day. They lit candles in their viewports as they went. They spoke the names of dead worlds aloud, and every one of them, in their own language, made the same quiet promise to the dust: never again. If you enjoy this journey into an alternative Star Wars universe, where destiny takes unexpected turns and balance means something entirely different, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We explore the infinite possibilities hidden within the galaxy far, far away, asking the questions that reshape everything you thought you knew. The Force has many paths. Come discover them with us.